It might ask you guys for permissions to record, maybe not.
That's me.
Okay.
Telling me you're streaming on YouTube.
Testing audio. It might ask you guys. Yeah, we're good. Cool. So I'm just posting links places, but welcome Alice to the 27th book club. Where you talking about Starship Troopers tonight. It was fun, kind of crazy.
Haven't seen the movie many years ago, and then reading this, the whole movie is pretty much the last like 30 pages of the book, and that's it, which is funny to me.
Yeah. Yeah, we were just talking about like I haven't really decided how much I actually liked the book.
Yeah.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah.
It wasn't what I expected. I mean, it was definitely like a polemic and not really a story so much.
I'm just proud of myself finishing it. It was a slog.
Let me let me tell you. Yeah, I just finished it today. Yeah, it was pretty
Let's
rough.
get let's get me like, how many pages is this damn thing?
I'm like, I've read 20 pages and it feels like 100.
When I saw Liz and Hyde at the basement last weekend, I told Liz where I was in the audiobook, and she goes, "Oh, you're getting ready to go to boot camp."
Yeah. And it's a long way from there.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is like such a slog to get through.
Very sci-fi.
Which is like totally yeah. Yeah, it is very sci-fi in that
Yeah,
way. I guess narratively too. Yeah.
yeah, like how much time it just takes explaining things as opposed to how much was even a story.
That was the whole book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um I'm almost done here. Okay, there we go. Okay. All right, Alice. You probably know most, if not all, of these people already. But to my left, we have David Penna. Am I saying your last name right?
Yeah.
Okay. And to my right, we have Taylor Santangelo from Morbid Orchid. Taylor did not read the book. This is something we're going to start trying to do now, where at least one of us has not read the book. That way, if we get loaded down with like jargon, we can have someone like, "What the fuck are you guys talking about?" So that's Taylor's role in this evening. Is to be like,
yeah.
keep us in line.
Judgment.
Like,
And
question
then
everything.
we have Rusty Fowler, who just released a new song. So go check that out. What's your name on Spotify?
Spotify's Telly guy.
Hell yeah. Yeah, so definitely go check that out. That was cool. And then we have Hyatt and Liz Collins from Cassette Stress.
Hey, how's it going?
And my dear friend Lazy Phalanges is here as well, joining us from Colorado.
Woo.
Lazy and I met online playing PS3 when I was like 14 years old.
Oh man.
and he does have a name, but I've never called him that. It feels weird. I'm like, oh, I don't like that.
Yeah.
But the reason we were doing Starship Troopers is me and Lazy were watching Starship Troopers the movie, and it's the first time I'd seen it. That was a couple months ago, and I was like, if we do this for book club, will you join? And he was like, yeah, I'll read that. So yeah, so it is very different from the movie. The pacing is non-existent in the book. I think I counted 2 fight scenes, which was the first chapter and the last chapter. And the entire middle of the book is just Heinlein. Am I saying, how do you say his name? Robert Heinlein? Heinlein?
I don't know.
Not
Sure.
Okay.
Mine.
Well, he's like, so the best way I can explain it is like the premise is like bugs and spaceships, which is like, it feels like his 6-year-old son gave him like a crayon picture he drew of a bug in a spaceship. And he's like, I'm going to make a really complex military drama out of this 6-year-old's drawing. That's the best way I can explain Starship Troopers.
Yeah. Or it's like he talks about the drawing for the first 5 pages and then the last 20 pages. And then in the middle, he's like, real quick for the entire book, rest of the entire book, I'm just going to explain something about this whole philosophy about how I think society should be organized and the military functions. We're just going to, and then we'll get back to the books.
And spank your kids.
And
Don't
spank
forget
your-
that.
Yeah, that's the important part.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. A lot of this book is just Heinlein like drilling his philosophy into you. It's like, this is not, his wife told him to stop talking about it at the dinner table. So he's like, okay, well, I'm going to write a book.
Make everybody else listen to it.
I think he makes some pretty solid points and then makes some pretty not solid points as well. Like the stuff he says about like how I guess the military is organized. Like they don't want you unless you're like willing to like be a dog, basically. Like unless you were completely willing to bend over backwards and follow orders to compliance efficiently, then they would prefer you just didn't join.
Yeah, and everybody fights.
Yeah,
Everybody fights, everybody works, right? But I thought there was some contradiction in some of that because they talk about everybody fights, everybody works. And then there are times where it's like, no, you can't do that, right? And people get in trouble for doing things. So I don't know. It was odd.
yeah, yeah. They, yeah. We don't want you here, but if you are gonna stay, then like you have to break down who you are, which is like that's pretty standard for a military. Like,
What was interesting too is that from how I understood it, that's specific to the mobile infantry, which is the division he's in, and that's not necessarily true about the other branches of the military.
okay, I guess we don't see a lot of the other stuff.
Because we see a bit of it in the movie, but not in the book at all. It's completely just focused on him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The
So
only
did
thing.
you notice?
Oh, go ahead.
Taylor. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say you only really see a little bit of the Navy because they use Navy ships. Otherwise, you don't really see how the Navy structures themselves at all, or any other division.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go, Taylor. I was going to say, the Navy's kind of there, but there's that thing almost in real life of Army, Marines, Navy, and that there's a little bit of divides between those, right? And that's in this book too.
Yeah, it was weird. We were looking up Heinlein's background, and apparently he was a naval officer. So it's just really contradictory. I don't know if he wanted to be a Marine or something, but yeah, it's just kind of interesting.
That is important context. Holy shit. Wow. Okay, so I get to feel like he did not like the Navy. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think I, I don't know that he really talked about them that much, or they were kind of like this whole separate group that they kind of kept to themselves. Well, I guess, yeah,
No, he was basically like, they don't go through the rigorous
that's
training that
true.
mobile
And they don't
infantry
actually have to
does.
like
They don't actually have
they
to
don't
do
the
anything.
drops. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. You're right. Never mind. Scratch what I said.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely like some animosity there.
He did mention something about is it if you're in command of a fleet that you have to have gone through both?
Oh,
Yeah, they did say that.
Yep.
huh.
So you can't just go pure Navy and then get like the top position. Because a big point of the book in general is that even with the way they do their whole voting thing, you can only vote if like you've done military. Like a whole philosophy is like you kind of have to sacrifice yourself or put yourself in a position where you could be sacrificed and to earn a right or whatever. Which is why he kind of complained about like how in the past, as in I guess the military time he did, there were a bunch of jobs that weren't really fighting, and he's kind of against that.
Yeah, he does say like in order to have like a 10,000 unit infantry, you needed like a total of 70,000 people to like facilitate that. Whereas like in the way their stuff is structured, everyone drops, everyone fights. So they're able to get it down from like 70,000 to 10,000.
And interestingly enough, there's a real tie to real business here, right? He gets to that point where he's talking about, where he talks about the number of officers compared to the number of frontline, like you're talking about. And he said, when you have a structure that has more officers than you do frontline, or a large percentage of officers, you have an army that's set up to lose. And I thought that was very interesting because that could be any organization, it could be army, it could be any business, right? You end up administratively heavy, you're probably going to lose. And I thought that was an interesting take
Yeah,
and
too much
true.
in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was interesting that I mean, he did spend a fair amount of time talking about that point. And I think that is the case in that, I mean, I think our current military and most militaries around the world require about that many support people for each person who's actually in combat. So I don't know, maybe he thought that was too much overhead, but I don't know. From everything I've read, that's just kind of what it requires to get all the stuff and all the equipment and all the fuel and all the food and all the medical taken care of.
Yeah. There's a lot of like really weird, unexplored concepts in the book as well. Uh, like the Neo dogs, which
Oh,
actually, let me see if I can find the part with the Neo dogs. I'm sure I bookmarked it because that was so fucking weird.
Do those show up in the movie? Sorry, I haven't seen the whole movie.
No, they don't show
Uh,
up.
Oh, that's a missed opportunity. But I guess they didn't have AI
Yeah.
then. So
the other aliens also don't show up in the movie. It's just the Arachnids.
Skinnies.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so skinnies aren't in the movie at all.
okay.
They're not
Well,
even mentioned.
and that was one thing that I thought was totally different about the movie too, is that in the movie the bugs are much more like animals, like they're just attacking. I guess they can throw the asteroids, but they're just like attacking like they're wild animals almost. And then in the book they're they have lasers and some and all kinds of ventilation equipment for their hives and
Space travel.
yeah, and they're a technological society. They're just creepy appearing to humans, but I thought that was really interesting that they were portrayed as as another intelligent society, not just kind of almost like in the movie Aliens, where they're just sort of a malevolent, almost animalistic thing.
What's really neat about that though, it's almost like a bee connection, right? You've got these quote hives or whatever, and you got workers, you got people that fight, or bugs that fight, you got bugs that don't fight, you've got the queen, you've got the brain, right? So it's really odd that different things have different jobs. But it is very bug like. So I thought that was kind of a neat real tie, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
for sure.
They're like being a hive mind, they're like the perfect version of communism. Where
I'm hilarious.
yeah. Yeah, that's right. He even talks about that. Where
Yeah.
it's like he also explains like that how that just straight up doesn't work for humans because they're not a hive mind and like there's personal interest. Whereas like any of these bugs will just mindlessly sacrifice themselves because they're just a finger of like a bigger thing.
Yeah.
So on page 39, we hear about the Neo dogs. And the Neo dogs are talking dogs that get paired with people, but in no uncertain terms, they're not actually a dog.
They can speak too.
Yeah, they talk. So on page 39, it says, have you ever seen a Neo dog? A Neo dog is not a talking dog. He is not a dog at all. He is an artificially mutated symbiote derived from dog stock. A Neo is about 6 times as bright as a dog, say about as intelligent as a human moron, except that the comparison is not fair to the Neo. A moron is a defective, whereas a Neo is a stable genius in his own line of work.
This is not politically correct.
Yeah, no, not at all.
Wait,
Yeah,
that's
you
not
can
even
tell
as bad
from
as the planet.
it's from the 50s.
These are on the side of the humans, the dogs.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's like a whole canine unit.
That's
The-
pretty cool.
They also talk about how when you get paired with one of these things, the bond is like stronger than a marriage. And there's like some weird like I guess like semi-psychic linkage going on.
Yeah, they're linked by their brains, like definitely.
Yeah. Because they talk about how like the guy who explains the whole thing to him is like, just know like if your dog dies, you're gonna wish you were dead. Like they have to go through intense recuperation if like one of the outfit dies and the other doesn't.
And
if the man dies, they kill the dog, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he talks
forget that.
about how maybe it would be better if they could just kill the man, but they're not allowed to, so they have to go through therapy instead.
Yeah.
it sounds like big assumption here, but it sounds like the book is not so much about the conflict, but it's about the people. Like it's a story about people. So maybe the inclusion of a dog is to like drive home humanity versus these drone insects that operate with a different mindset. Do you think so or no?
Yeah, you're pretty much right. Like so like basically the premise is that there is a race of alien bugs, and they just straight up call them bugs, but they're also not exactly bugs. They're like arachnid things that are huge, and that is kind of a side point because that is the premise, but that's more just like a setting for him to tell this story about military training, and it is heavily focused on the like human element of like it follows one character going from like signing up to like going all the way through boot camp into like leading his own unit. But that is like a weird side point to the story, which is actually just about the military.
Yeah, and you guys were talking how like they would talk crap on the other branches. I have a family member in the military, and that's definitely a thing that happens. It's not like they don't actually think it, it's just for fun.
Yeah.
They're like the Air Force, for example, would be called the Chair Force if you're a Marine or something. But
That's a sick burn.
yeah.
I've never heard that. I like it.
The chair force.
Did you highlight the part about the sanctuary planet?
Is that where the bugs are from?
No, it's like,
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. I don't think I did. Can you explain it?
wait, do you guys remember the planet that the narrator called retarded?
Yeah, that part was really weird to me.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was interesting.
I felt like there's different parts of this book where it's really interesting ideas, but they're kind of disjointed. Where it's like, now we're going to talk about this for a while. And it's like, this is really interesting as an idea, but I don't understand what it has to do with what was happening previously or after this.
because he
Yeah.
goes into like a whole chapter just talking about the biology of this like planet where like apparently the plants and animals haven't evolved, and but like I said, he just goes into a whole chapter about it, and then we never hear about the planet again. Like it just kind
The
of
bonus of the planet is it's like largely women. The women are like a huge, proportion of the planet and not involved.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, part of the point about that planet that he was trying to make is that, he talks a lot about, all this strenuous, struggle and learning and, overcoming odds. And that was essentially one criticism that he had of the planet was that there was not enough mutation and struggle on the planet for it to be, vigorous. And that's why the humans were basically able to just like walk in and take it over. But I remember he was expressing some fear that, humans living there after so many generations might, have the fight taken out of them because it was too perfect and they didn't have to struggle. I mean,
Yeah, he was talking about how there was less radiation on that planet, which he was saying. He was saying, I don't know if this is actually true, but at least a genetic mutation, so that they wouldn't really evolve on that planet. It was kind of what his claim. So then he was kind of, at least the way I understood it, he was kind of proposing this hypothetical of like, should they leave it as it is, or should they introduce radiation in order to force evolution so they're not left behind?
yeah.
Which I guess kind of goes back to he writes a lot of the book about like these bigger ideas of like uh almost like, is it good to introduce struggle to someone to make them better, or would it be better to just let them live their life, kind of?
Yeah, because that's the way he feels about the military aspect of things too, right? For a little bit he talks about moral compass, and he says there's no such thing as moral compass. There's only conditioning, right? So he really ties a lot of people's abilities back to you are a product of the environment, and we want you to act out of what you learned in that environment, right? And otherwise, you don't have a moral compass. You just know what you've been conditioned to do. I thought that was kind of interesting, and along those lines, right? It's almost what was a 48 hours, whether you're a product of biology or you're a product of your environment. He almost kind of touches on that a little bit,
Yeah.
Taylor, can you read this part? Starting here.
Sure. But I can tell you what sort of planet it is. Like Earth, but retarded. You want me to keep going? Or did you just want to hear me say retarded?
No, just a little bit more.
Just a little bit more.
Literally retarded. Like a kid who takes 10 years to learn to wave bye-bye and never does manage to master patty cake. It is a planet as near like Earth as two planets can be, same age according to the planetologists, and its star is the same age as the sun and the same type. So say the astrophysicists.
That's good. You can keep reading. I did mostly just, yeah.
But an interesting thing about that is kind of talking about how the narrative is kind of like all over the place. There are a lot of times you'll really go into like really deep like civic philosophy, and then randomly you'll have the narrator talk like that, or talk about women like he's a 14-year-old, or like or like for some reason he's like really really bad at math to the point where he's had like 4 or 5 different like tutors just for math.
Yeah, he's the type of chauvinist that is like thinks he's doing a good thing by like putting women on a pedestal. You know?
Right. Yeah.
Is like they're the like evolved ones, they're better at all these things, and like they're the whole reason we fight, but it's like not, I don't know. It's not like degrading, but it's also it's chauvinism. It's like 50s chauvinism. Absolutely.
Well, and also, I mean, in the whole
Yeah, it's like 50s.
thing is he's in this closed world where all he interacts with are men. The only people that he interacts with as people are men. It's like, Alex, like you're saying, like either women are the up on the pedestal and they're flying the spaceship and they're these untouchable creatures, or it's just like, people that he's sleeping with when he's on leave. That's kind of like the two options, but it's not people that he has any sort of, professional relationship or personal relationship with. They're just kind of like these,
Yeah, I was wondering how much of the book, because there's parts that are definitely like him just giving his moral philosophy. There's other parts where I'm like, is this more about uh like Johnny's experience? So sort of like Johnny feels this way about women because there literally aren't any women. He hasn't seen any for like a year.
Oh, interesting. I think it's probably a mix of both. Like, because there is like a structure to how it's built. Like, like the women are kept separate, so there is like that within the military. But you're right that it is also from Johnny's point of view. So a lot of the
Well,
hot takes
well, also the women are kept separate, but also the Navy and mobile infantry are kept separate in separate parts of the ship.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's this weird part where he even mentions like I don't know if it's something that Johnny believes or it's like canon within the book, but in the book it says that women have like better reflexes than men. So
That's why they make
yeah, but by that logic, why don't they make good MI?
Right.
Because you're just wearing a power suit anyways.
Right. That's a good point. I didn't think about that.
Because at least in the movies, I mean, it was all co-ed.
Yeah, that was one thing that was really interesting to me is how in the movie they just totally like that's something that is brought up a number of times in the book and they just like completely ignore that in the movie.
Yeah. There's a lot of things that didn't make it into the movie, like the power suits at all.
Well, I think because they actually wanted people to watch it.
And the wild thing is the power suits were a big part of the book.
Mhm.
I mean, to the point of, if you ended up with a lot of them down, he ends up working on them near the end of the book, right? I know how to do this. I can work on some of these myself in my spare time or whatever. So the guy, commanding officer or whatever tells him, well, if you know how to do it, suit up and do it. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So that was not in the movie at all.
No.
No,
Zero.
it wasn't. That's a good point because yeah, they talk so much about that. It's almost like I mean, and I guess that's just sort of I don't know if you've seen any like army related movies or anything like that. People are always really worried about and learning how to use equipment and how key that is to people's effectiveness. I mean, that makes sense that would be something that he talked about a lot. But yeah, that was a big part of the book and is not at all in the movie.
That would be cool if it were in a movie to see the way that they bounce from like house rooftop to rooftop and stuff. Like, yeah, that would just be neat. See how
It's got to be a budget issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What era is the movie?
Late 90s.
97.
So they could probably do special effects.
Which I mean they did for the spiders.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean another thing that could be is if you have like famous actors playing these roles, you kind of want to show their faces. Because when we're saying power armor, it's like thick, like actual, like almost half neck.
Cool.
Yeah, why pay for Denise Richards if you're gonna just put her in a suit?
Yeah.
True. That's an excellent point. Yeah, it's like they probably just want to be able to show the faces. They could like every once in a while have the visor come up or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think my favorite part of the whole book is the first sentence.
I'll be back on these restrooms.
Yeah. The first two sentences. Page 1, I always get the shakes before a drop. I've had the injections, of course, and hypnotic preparation, and it stands to reason that I can't really be afraid. I feel like that is such like an establishing thing. And this entire first chapter actually is like extremely misleading as to what the book is. I feel like he wrote the first chapter to pitch it to like publishers and like get the reader involved, and then like it does not really it's a completely different book after that.
That's really funny. Yeah, because yeah, the first chapter, I'm like, oh man, this is gonna be a quick read. And then it's oh no.
Yeah. It takes a wild slowdown there somewhere. There's some really interesting themes that he hits on. I love it, and it's pretty early in the book. But I don't remember exactly where it is. Where he talks about, we could just H bomb this thing, but we don't do that, and we don't do that not because we don't want to go in and just destroy the civilization or all the bugs or whatever else, but we do it because we want to teach them a lesson.
Yeah.
And think about the real world for a second. And we have the ability to do a lot of things, but we don't. And why do we do it? I think we do it to teach them a lesson. So there was a very real point that I think he drove home there in very simplistic terms, but I think he drove home something we really do because we have the ability to dominate a lot of things, but we opt not to. And there's always an underlying strategy as why we don't do it. And that's something else that he kind of gets into in the book is we could do this, but we don't do it because, right? And I thought that was kind of interesting because there's always a story that as citizens, there's always a story that we're never going to know. And I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. There's some interesting commentary here about war itself, like you said, Rusty. Like, I think part of why we don't do that in our world is we don't actually want to resolve conflicts. We want them to go on forever. Because then if you fix the problem, all the money dries up. But like if you keep the problem going forever, then it generates all this money for the worst people. Yeah.
I agree with that.
I think that also ties into in the book the part like why the training is so difficult. Like it's meant to be difficult. It's not necessarily meant to be effective. Like it is, but the difficulty is a big part of why they do it like that. Because they don't want people who won't stick it out to the difficult. So even if there's not a war, they basically have to pit people through the difficulty of that in order for them to earn their citizenship, because otherwise, it wouldn't be worth anything.
Yeah.
So they kind of like make it more difficult than it has to be.
Oh, something else you should know, Taylor, is they have civilians and then citizens, which are a different class of people. And basically, only citizens are allowed to vote. Civilians are not. And citizens are retired military.
Not active.
Yeah. Yeah, specifically not active military.
Because they can vote to stop a war.
Got it.
Yeah.
Is there a requirement of society to serve, or is it no?
No, because they make a big point of they only want people who are willing to serve because only they deserve the right.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the philosophy behind it is that only people who are willing to sacrifice themselves should have like a say in society. I mean, in general, the book is it's a little fascistic, which kind of it works in its universe because they are kind of fighting like a world-ending disaster per se.
Yeah.
But it's what I find about it, because like I said, it's not really the best novel ever, but it's interesting because you don't really get that many novels that are like pro all that what it's
Yeah.
because most things are like anti-military, like governments like this or whatever.
Yeah, and like that's a great point. Like Heinlein is very much pro-military.
He sounds like he is the voting class he wrote about. Like that's who he thinks he is.
He thinks only military. Yeah, that's what he believes is only military people should be able to vote. Yeah. Which I mean, in a wartime, there might be some truth to that.
Unless you've served.
I'm sorry, Liz. What'd you say?
Oh, sorry. He basically says like the reason that only people who serve should be able to vote is because they're the only people who have social empathy. Like unless you're willing to sacrifice yourself for others, like then you shouldn't vote. But I think that's kind of a wild notion to think that you can't vote for the greater good and do things outside of yourself unless you serve in the military.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I really don't know how I feel about it, to be honest, because like I see his point of view at the very least. But yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry, what were you gonna say, Rusty?
So just an odd question. I mean, for someone who believes in the military as much as he obviously does as a person, as a not as a character, but as a person, as a writer. Um, do you find it odd that, and we talked about this a little bit before we started, but do you find it odd that it's really easy to get in, and it's really easy to get out? It's like, hey, I'm not feeling today, guys. I'm out of here. And everybody's like, okay, see ya. How do you sustain an ongoing war that's been going on forever, right? This thing that they're talking about has been going on forever. How do you sustain any kind of force at all if early in the game anybody and everybody can just leave? My cat's going to start coming up here now. I found that really odd, right? So if this is an ongoing conflict, how's there any sustainability at all when just people can walk out up to a certain point?
Maybe
So,
that's and tie it to voting. Maybe that's the
well, I would actually question where this was written in the 50s, right? And he was in the military, so he was in World War II then, right?
Yeah.
He was out before.
Did, did World War II require any kind of draft? Or do people or was there enough volunteers?
Everybody was essentially drafted, but no, he was out of the military in the 30s, so before World War II.
Oh,
He was,
okay.
he just, I think he was born maybe.
he was born in 1907. I
Okay,
think
yeah.
is what he said.
So by the time, the 30s rolled around, I mean, yeah.
Maybe World War One.
Let's see. So
No, he wouldn't have been old enough
No, he
then.
would have been 7 in 1914 and 11 in 1918. So he would have been 2. So he was like that interwar.
He was in between World War One and World War Two. Okay. So at the time this was written, would that be World War Two? Yeah, that'd be in World War Two.
No, 59. No,
It was
written
10 years
in
later.
It was written in 59. So that was even after Korea.
Oh shit. Okay.
So Korea was 50 to 54.
Oh
But-
wow. Okay.
But before, I think this was not long before, maybe a couple of years before the first U.S. troops were really involved in Vietnam. So it's right on the cusp of that.
I would say he seems pretty very idealistic about the military because he also mentions that the mobile infantry never promotes somebody to fill a position. They'd rather go short staffed.
Yeah.
So I think in his view, there would be enough people that would volunteer, I guess. If things got bad enough, more people would volunteer, I guess, would be what he thinks would happen.
Yeah. I think
This is interesting too, thinking about it. I think it's very it makes a lot of sense with the time because the Cold War would have been ramping up during this time. And like at a time where probably people were pretty nervous about a lot of it. And so yeah, I think thinking about, the military being a necessary thing and some of the height of the Cold War.
Yes.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, well, if someone who probably had been in the military in the the teens, or I guess the 20s and 30s, and then lived through World War II, maybe not an active service, but I mean, you can see, given his perspective there, what having a very idealistic version of the military that I think was not it was justified.
Yeah, because it's not until after Vietnam that we really got into that like anti-war phase.
But one of the things that I thought about on reading this, and I guess this is my cynical self, is that I think, and this is just my perspective, but I think the world, the idealized military that he's thinking of, or and that probably he experienced in some ways, what is only possible if it's not politicized. Because as soon as you make being in the military the only way to be a citizen, then all of a sudden you create this incentive for somebody who wants to essentially take over the society to make sure that they're in a high up position in the military, because then you choose your voters. You're all of a sudden you become in control of whoever of of whoever can be a citizen, because you have absolute, power to kick people in and out. And I mean, I think it would immediately, as soon as somebody with, dictatorial ambitions got in the military, it would all of a sudden lose its sort of idealistic flavor that he's got in this book.
That's a really good point.
You know what would happen? Different political parties would be based on different branches.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
Oh shit. It's like, oh man, yeah.
Because everyone who left, an MI would vote a certain way. Everyone who left the Air Force or whatever, you get the idea. Like the Navy.
Actually, I was confused about something. Only citizens can vote. Can non-citizens hold political office? I don't think it ever explained.
I don't know.
I
that
don't think he
mentioned.
does. Yeah.
I kind of assumed that wasn't the case, but I don't know if it explicitly says that.
I feel like that would be the case, but
Yeah. That's an interesting question though, because I automatically assumed that you had to be military in order to. I mean, that makes sense based on the world that he's presenting.
because I feel like even if it's not like an explicit rule or law or whatever, I feel like default they would only vote in people who serve. Kind of how like there's no law that says you have to be religious to be a president, but they all kind of have to be by default. You can't be like an atheist.
I see what you're saying. Even if you could, you're not going to win.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because no one's gonna vote for an atheist in our world. And
Right.
There's no like.
Good point. Yeah. If you're military, why would you vote for a civilian?
Yeah, because they didn't
You
make
would
the
vote.
sacrifice.
You would vote for a citizen 100% of the time because you're already military.
Yep.
That's really interesting.
Is everyone of the opinion that the author is in favor of this form of government, or is it? Yeah,
I feel that way.
it sounds.
Yeah.
It sounds pretty flawed from an outsider's point of view because it's just a system that basically ensures that it exists because the only way to change it is to come from within it. And the only people who are going to last through to the point of being able to vote are in favor of the system. And I was just wondering if maybe he was just writing about a flawed, corrupt form of governing.
So Taylor, let me ask you a question. What you just said, does that sound familiar?
Well, it's
And,
definitely.
I'll just leave it at that.
Yes, and I'll leave it at that.
That's funny.
Because it's a more ambiguous here, but it's definitely more pro that type of government. But the movie itself is it's more of a critique of that.
Yeah. Yeah. The movie's almost a
Okay.
parody of the book. It's like,
Oh wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the actual director for the movie, he even said he purposely didn't even finish reading the book because he kind of disagreed with.
So now I'm gonna have to watch the movie.
I feel vindicated.
The guy's like, yeah, well, that's good. Let's
Enough.
book a studio lot.
Like he felt like he read enough that he could parry it. He didn't have to
yeah.
finish it.
Yeah. Yes, I totally agree. So this world is like what really kind of like concerned me the most about this world is like the civilian aspect of it. Like there's a part here on page 79 where so right now we're in boot camp and one of his, I think it's Hendrik, is getting flogged because he hit a commanding officer. He like punches him in the face. And they don't want to punish him. But they're like, he says, I punched the commanding officer. And they're like, fuck, dude, why did you say that? Now we have to punish you. But what's
And that
interesting,
is to keep everybody else in line, right? Because
Yeah.
if there's no punishment for that, we can't control everybody else. So did
Yeah.
anybody else think as that was unfolding, that nothing was going to happen to the recruit that punched somebody, but they were going to take out the commanding officer? I thought he was going to be the one who got flogged. Now he did get kind of reprimanded, right? Because that recruit should have never hit you. You should have never trusted him enough in order that could have ever happened, right? But I thought for sure they were going to take him out and just shoot him or something, the commanding officer, for letting it happen. And
Well,
that was weird though.
so shortly after that, though, I think is where they have the discussion. I guess it's like a flashback with his teacher, where they're
Yeah,
discussing punishment of children. So I think the the point, the perspective that he was trying to give, his point of view is that basically the commanding officer is like the parent. So the parent's not necessarily punished for their child misbehaving, but they are the one who actually mess up. So they know they're the one who's in the wrong.
Yeah, because the book is pro hitting children as punishment.
Yeah.
I would say overtly so, very much so, yeah.
Because even though, okay, so we mentioned the flogging stuff in the military, which you might expect, but that applies to even regular people.
That's where I was going with this.
If
So,
you commit regular
yeah.
crimes, it's even public.
That's
like a public display for everyone.
Yeah, this is a very fascist world because paragraph at page 79, I have never seen a flogging back home. While they do it in public, of course, they do it back of the federal building, and father had given me strict orders to stay away from there. I tried disobeying him on it once, but it was postponed and I never tried to see one again. So that, like, he kind of glosses over this. Like, that's like a real quick thing.
And because he's raised in that society. So.
Yeah, but it stopped. That definitely stopped me. And I'm like, what the fuck? So they, as a form of punishment for just regular people, they flog people. And it doesn't even say for what crime.
So now the comment you made earlier, where like, if in most books, if this was a critique of that type of society, they would kind of just leave it at that or whatever. But the thing is, after this section, he goes into a whole moral philosophizing of why it's actually correct to do that. And the example he uses is like, okay, imagine you have a dog and you're trying to teach that dog how to not pee inside a house, right? So he's comparing this dog to a child. So, and he's even criticizing our society. In our society, if a child commits a crime, they get like a lighter sentence or whatever. But he's saying you don't hit the dog for peeing or whatever. And then one day, once the dog reaches a certain age, what if in that society, the moment he does pee, you just pull out a gun and like kill the dog?
That's a bit hard to follow.
So like in our society, if you're a child, you just get our current society, you just get like punishment. And what he's saying is that it doesn't really teach them anything. So that the moment they become an adult and they commit an actual crime, then they get a harsh punishment.
Gotcha.
But he's saying no, even as a child, you need to be like hit.
Yeah. So that you're ready for society after childhood.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which I mean, you can disagree with it or whatever, but
No,
but from his point of view, he's trying to justify.
Yeah, that's interesting. You guys are doing a lot of talking about the author of the book, which is just interesting. If I had to guess, I would say, did you guys like the book? I would guess you were kind of just like interested, but didn't think it was a good book.
I think you summed that up perfectly. I think it was very interesting. I don't really think where it really suffers for me is the narrative. Like, it's not a well-written story. It's a bunch of world building and explaining things, but like the story part of it is like severely lacking in my opinion, and it's extremely disjointed. Like, he'll be explaining what's happening, like some things will happen, and then he'll go on this long-winded 5 to 10 page rant about how he views the world.
Yeah.
Pretty
And
fun.
I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, he even goes so far as to like, there are a lot of places in the book where he's not even explaining something in, in the context of anything else. He's like, here, we're going to bring in a professor and they're going to sit and give a lecture to you, the reader, on this topic. Like, I mean, he doesn't, there's subtlety was not a consideration in this.
I did think that part of the book is hilarious.
Wait, what were you saying?
I think that part of the book is hilarious because it's like, given the context that it is a book, he's like, I wrote this perfect system that works perfectly. It's no problems. And here's a teacher that lives in this system to tell you that all of my views are correct.
Right.
So I got to jump back to that question. Did I like the book? I struggled with this one. I'm not going to say I didn't like it, but I think the writer could have taken this and made it this and probably told the exact same story and got the points across that he was trying to get across. Because it sounds like the movie is really more about the action that happened in the book, but not all the background stuff. And so it sounds like, even though I don't know if the movie is great or not, I don't know that. I'll have to watch it. But
It's
it
really
sounds like
good.
that was more. It sounds like that's more of the plot and less of the pontificating, because I felt like there was a lot of pontificating here, and
Yeah.
that was a struggle.
I would say it's probably about half the book
Yeah.
is.
The structure of the book is here's something fascistic, and then here's like why it's good actually, and it's like the majority of the book. While the movie is more like here's the fascistic thing, and by just showing it by itself and like how bad it is, they don't really have to like it becomes more of a critique of it. They don't include the here's why it's justified section to it.
Yeah, it's just not a novel. To me, it's like it's a polemic masquerading as a novel. And to me, that's if I'm sitting down to read a novel, I'm gonna read some good characters, things like that. There's probably, there's plenty of novels that have lots of political philosophy in it. That's okay. But the characters were like the depthness of like, Popeye or something. Like, I mean, it's just it's not a novel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did really like the book and I really like the movie. I think it's funny because I think that they both are have a certain point of view and sort of contradict themselves.
What were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, I don't think like good has to have a checklist of why it's good. I've unfortunately not seen the movie for this one either, but there's a movie called The Crow, which I would put on my list of favorite movies, but it's not a movie that I think is like very deep or a great story. I just think it like gets on my list by virtue of its like style and the music and the aesthetic.
Yeah.
And maybe this book is more cool than it is like groundbreaking or deep, I guess.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I'm probably being harsh.
We're all being harsh, but like
I will say I think it does a really good job of the world building, so then when things are happening, you feel like you're really in that world.
yeah, to his credit, he is to sci-fi what Tolkien is to fantasy. Like so many things are derivative of Starship Troopers. Because this is 50s, like a lot of sci-fi got ideas from this. He's an idea man. He's not an execution man.
I did have one other comment that I didn't know where to fit in, which is I love early, just like early 1900s stories and ideas about sci-fi, because now living in 2024, we've seen it all, and like if you have a monster in a movie, it's this like some crazy over the top thing, whereas back in the day, like the idea of like a big scary spider was horrifying, and I just think that's kind of cool. Like they didn't need to create a new thing we've never heard of. They're just like, what's this thing we all know? Imagine if that was big, how terrifying that would be.
Yeah. The bugs are pretty fucking terrifying. Like he explains them really well too. Like they have a hive mind and the brain lives underground, and all of the soldiers are like completely self-sacrificing and like mindless, just work like drones. Yeah.
That is like truly how a beehive works.
Yeah,
it's really cool.
And interestingly enough, when he talked about one of the guys when they were underground on Planet P, he talks about that he shields himself with the brain because he knows that the fighting bugs are not going to shoot the brain because they know it would be just like committing suicide, because if they kill the brain, they're all done. I thought that was kind of an interesting statement.
that brings me to my favorite part of the movie, which is Neil Patrick Harris.
Hey,
He puts his okay, something we haven't explained at all because Heinlein doesn't explain it very well is telepathy is a thing in this universe as well. And they have like psychic soldiers, which is a bigger thing in the movie than it is in the book, I'd say. Like it's I think Lazy and I were talking about it earlier. There may be like one or two sentences that say that.
I, as far as I remember, there's only one actual mention of psychics or telepathy or something. I remember that sticking out to me because I'm like, wait, go back to that. Is that a thing?
I totally missed that in the book.
Yeah.
And
There
then
is
and then there's the guy that like draws the tunnels, but he doesn't explain what that guy's doing. I think as the character, he questions that he might just have really good hearing or something.
Mhm.
yeah. I'll see if I can find that passage. But yeah, it's I think it is in the book, but it's like so scarce where it's like it's a much bigger role in the movie. But my favorite scene is like it's one of the last scenes. They capture one of the brains to like understand it, like take it to R&D, and Neil Patrick Harris puts his hand on its head and he says, "It's afraid," and they all start cheering, which is
Amazing.
such a good scene.
Uh,
But yeah, there's a lot of ideas that he just throws at you and doesn't explore at all. Like telepathy, like there's a lot of hypnosis actually. They condition their soldiers with hypnosis. There's neo dogs, which is like just such a weird one to me.
Yeah, they give you your briefings while you're like asleep. So like, oh, here's your mission, here's what you're gonna do. They just give it to you while you're asleep, so that when you wake up, you're already ready to do your thing. Another cool thing that's in this book that I'm pretty sure this is the first example is I don't know if you play any sci-fi video games or stuff where you have like orbital drop like pods. So it's like an individual soldier in a pod that drops all the way from space to that's in here.
Yeah.
Cool.
I would be interested to know like what came before this and then to read more about the influence of of the books because sometimes there are things like this that are so that reading them later they're so influential that you've seen all the things that were influenced by them, so by the time you get back to the original thing it's like, oh yeah, well, of course they have space, mechanized spacesuits and they drop from space, but like if this is the first time that any of that stuff came out, you can see a lot more what the why this book has persisted.
Yeah.
But I would be interested in, and I'm gonna try to do that, track down like read more about his influence and the threads that continued from
yeah,
this.
that is actually a really good point because I always like there's certain movies too that there's something where it's like you're watching it and it's like this movie is really boring. And it's like well yeah that shot lasted so long because there was never a shot like that before. So if you watched this when it came out, you would be amazed at this scene and never want it to end.
Yeah.
But now you're watching, you're like this is boring. Like get on with it. So I wonder if there's some of that with Starship Troopers where it's like it was kind of generic and it's like well it wasn't when it came out though. So this might have been much more interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I found the part with that guy. So the special unit. They're on the alien planet, which I think is called Sheol. I don't even know if we should address that.
This is like during that last mission, right?
Yeah. Just for context, Sheol is the name of in Hebrew in Israelite culture. It was a pit in the ground. It's like basically a giant common grave, which is what the Terrans call the home planet of these bugs. So I don't know like if that's like some subtle anti-Semitism. It wouldn't be surprising considering the set, like I guess when this was written. and also it doesn't seem entirely out of character for Heinlein. But the way they describe this part, they're on the alien planet, and the aliens have hit underground, like they burrowed underground, and they're trying to find out where they're at. So they bring in this. They're called the special unit. And the way it's described, this guy steps off the plane. Major Landry had two officers were wearing armor and hand flamers, but the talent had no armor and no weapons, just an oxygen mask. He was dressed in a fatigue uniform without insignia, and he seemed terribly bored by everything. He looked like a 16-year-old boy until I got close and saw a network of wrinkles around his weary eyes. He got out. As he got out, he took off his breathing mask. I was horrified. So I spoke to Major Landry, helmet to helmet without radio. This is page 249, by the way, Alice. Major, the air around here is hot. Besides that, we've been warned that pipe down, he knows it. So when they say hot, they're talking about it's radioactive in this area. So this guy steps out, has no armor, he takes off his breathing apparatus. So I guess Heinlein thinks you can protect yourself from radiation by wearing a mask. But
I think you mentioned other toxins in the air also.
So maybe that was not radioactive then. It's other shit in the air. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
That makes a lot more sense.
There was a part where they blew up something with a nuke. And so I think there's a lot of radiation around. But you can also breathe radioactive dust, so that does make a difference.
Oh yeah, I forgot they have like portable nukes.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to read all this, but basically this thing that at first looks like a kid, but is like really wrinkly, is able somehow to just tell where the bugs are. And this is from the point of view of Johnny, who thinks, well, maybe he's just got really good hearing.
Johnny's not the brightest.
Yeah, that's true too.
And I mean, another point that Johnny even mentions is that MI, command actually doesn't really tell them much, because they know that the enemies have ways to like just go into your brain and like suck out your information. So there's a bunch of like interesting stuff that the character just doesn't like know.
Yeah, it's very compartmentalized military, that's realistic. Like every military is like that, where it's like you know just as much as you need to, so you can't have information extracted.
The slips and ships.
Yeah.
I do think that's part of what makes the book feel disjointed, is that like sometimes it's like here's this teacher explaining how the entire world works for world building, and then sometimes you don't know how some of the most basic things work because it's only from Johnny's perspective and he doesn't know.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Now that's a good point. And I think that's also, that may also be his experience, military, and his experience in the military. Because I feel like that's always part of like, watching anything about World War II, like Band of Brothers or something, that people are always being packed up and shipped off somewhere, and they're like, oh, we don't even know where we're going. So they only know get off the ship, and they're like, well, I guess this is what we're attacking now.
Everything's on a need to know basis. Yeah.
This is a random thought, but I feel like a good way to have a movie of the story would be from the point of view of like a nameless soldier, where all that disjointed stuff now, instead of making the book quicker, is actually like in service of just being caught up in the machine.
Yeah.
Just an abstract thought I had.
Yeah. The movie is very like just action oriented and is not philosophical at all. And when it is, it's like making fun of the book. It's like a parody of the book, basically. Yeah.
I've never heard of like something intentionally
Going against
disrespecting the source
Yeah.
material that's funny.
because
It works,
kind of
too.
like the point you just made that's actually interesting about the movie. During the movie, you get like these like in between different action scenes, you'll have like these infomercials that are propaganda for the movie for the war. Or whatever.
I'm doing my part.
Like
Yeah.
they're so cheesy and generic. But anyways, throughout the story, you're following these three soldiers or whatever, and then the very last like infomercial is them, the three main characters being used as propaganda. Like they become part of the machine.
Oh wow, yeah. I didn't even think about that. That's true.
Like, oh, one day you could be like, it's basically enlisting people being like, one day you could be like Rico, the main character, and like he's this cool badass super soldier, or you could be like the woman and she's like a cool pilot, and that's just kind of how the movie ends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Robert Hyland was deceased by the time the movie came out. I was just looking that up. So he died in 1988. So yeah, so they could probably parody it all they wanted to.
Yeah. And like it makes sense too, because a lot of this stuff probably went off a lot better in the 50s than in the 90s or going into the 2020s.
Yeah, it really reads like a 50s book.
Yeah. Couple other just like quick things. There is some of the dialogue I actually really do like. Or not dialogue, but just some of the stuff that's written here, just how it's written. There was one part I labeled, I can't find it.
I do really like the vocabulary in the book of like on the bounce.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would like a word count of how many times on the bounce is used.
What
On the
about
bouncer.
buying it or buying the farm?
Yeah, that one too.
Yeah, or partially buying it.
What's
You
really
bought the
funny is
farm,
that
or
I
you're going to
had a
partially buy it.
discussion like about a month prior to us reading this book, and he was like talking about buying the farm. I was like, "What are you talking about? I don't know what that means." Yeah, and so he explained this to me, and I was like, "Wow, I'm really glad I have that context if we're reading this book. Otherwise, I would have been really confused."
That's so funny. I can't find the part, but there's a part where he's talking about when he gets moved from Camp Carey to up in the mountains. He's talking about being able to get away from base camp finally, because even though they were allowed to leave, they're in the middle of fucking nowhere. So you can walk out. Yeah, sure, you can leave, but there's nowhere to go.
Yeah.
So they get moved to another base, which is closer to a town. And he, at one point, he says, "You have time to take your soul out of your pocket and look at it." And I really liked that sentence. I like the way he said that. There is some like really genius stuff like that every once in a while. Yeah.
That's what kept you going.
I mean, I don't hate it. We are being like super critical of it. It's got its redeeming qualities. I also like he waxes philosophical so much, but it's not like I disagree with everything he said. Like he makes good points about like I don't know if like the government I don't know if you should like be military in order to vote. But I do think like it used to be like you had to own land, which is like to me kind of makes sense because it's like you have a stake in what you're voting on. Like it actually in a very real way affects you. And this stuff like that.
Plus, you're paying taxes.
Say what?
Plus, you were paying taxes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think maybe if they made like taxes, that's a good point, Rusty. Maybe if they made taxes optional, but you could only vote if you paid taxes, that would be cool. But like there is some stake involved, you know? Like I think maybe that something along those lines might be useful.
I think this is like going off the book, but I don't think like what you just said is that controversial so long as like the playing field was made truly equal to being able to own land. Like,
Yeah.
So
the service element of, you know, you can only have a say if you're contributing in this way seems logical, but then it's rare that the infrastructure is in place so that everyone has a equal shot at getting to that point.
That's why owning land is not the answer, because it is so corrupt. Whether you like,
That's
all the land is owned by Bill Gates, so only Bill Gates gets the vote.
Yeah, because a
the thing
lot
in
of
the book that he did make clear is even though the military doesn't want you, unless you're, willing to serve and do all kinds of stuff, uh, they can't turn anyone away. So they can't turn anyone away for any reason. It doesn't matter if you have disabilities, whatever. And basically, I don't think they can kick you out either. So unless you do something that basically gets you a death sentence, they can't force you to leave either. So anyone can, regardless of their ability, to basically just stick it out and be able to vote.
Did I hear right that the arrangement is like at will though? Like you can bounce?
yeah.
Yeah. So it's completely voluntary, and you can leave at any time.
I mean, the only exception is like if you committed a crime while you're part of the military, then it gets a little more. Like you have to
Yeah.
get punished first, but after your punishment, then you're free to
Cool.
go.
What were your favorite? What was your favorite moment in the book?
Uh, it probably is no one else's favorite part, but there's like a whole chapter that's devoted to just talking about the power armor, like the mechanics of it, how it feels, how it works, the weapons applied to it, just stuff like that. Just because to me, it's like the first. That would have been like the first example of someone like actually
Yeah.
getting into it like that.
Yeah, that was cool. That's a good point. That was neat.
Because I mean, like I said, like narrative wise, story wise, books is kind of weak, but his strength is that it's like the world.
Yeah. What's someone else's favorite moment in the book?
My favorite moment's actually the end. And not a joke, but it's because the way the end works, I think, is something that only really works in a book. Because basically, when he's made an officer, there's a sergeant, and he's basically told to do whatever the sergeant says, even though he's technically the officer. And so the whole last fight, he's talking about his sergeant. And it's not until the end that you find out that his sergeant is who actually trained him in boot camp. And he says, Captain never had to tell me that I had the best sergeant in the whole fleet. I already knew him. But you don't find out because he never mentions him by name. I feel like it's something that really works well in the book, but wouldn't work well anywhere else because you'd hear them talking. You'd see them, yeah.
Oh yeah, totally.
That's funny because your favorite part is the ending. My favorite part is like the first paragraph
The first.
because it's such an establishing. That part is just so like such an establishing shot.
So I'm going to go with more philosophically what I like about part of the book, and it's near the end, right? And that's when they basically go in and he loses several men near the end at Planet P or whatever when they're underground and everything. And then the part of the ceiling falls on him and he ends up and he wakes up and he's in the hospital or whatever and he's recovering. And for all practical purposes, it was a loss. But much like in I think a lot of military, you look for the wins and the losses, and he does find a win in the loss, right? And they point that out. But then I'm gonna even take this back and relate it to Old Man in the Sea.
Mm.
I mean, in the ending, because in my mind it's very similar in the fact that okay, I've been through this situation where I didn't know what was going on. I was struggling. All this bad stuff was going down. I get taken out, right? The old man doesn't even know if he wants to go back and fish anymore in this situation, but at the end, guess what? We're going back out.
Yep.
And that's how the book ends. They're going back out, and so I think there's a continuation element to this that says that, okay, so regardless of what happened, this guy's in it. He's not going to bounce, right? I mean, he's in it, and he's going to remain in it. He's dedicated to it. And I thought that was kind of a neat concept after really as much questioning of the whole situation as this guy's going through. He's questioning everything. He doesn't understand why things are like they are, right? And at the end, it's like, yeah, I'm here. I'm in. So I don't know.
Yeah. That brings me back to when he was deciding whether he just wanted to finish his term or go career too. And he ultimately decides he wants to do this as his career, not just 2 years.
Yep.
Yeah. My closing thought is here on page 97. This is during one of his rants, but it's one of the ones I like relate to strongly. In the last paragraph, he says, "Nothing of value is free. Even the breath of life is purchased at birth, only through gasping effort and pain." And then he quotes someone, I can't remember who said this originally, but doesn't credit it either. But basically, liberty has to be paid with blood. You don't just get to live in a free world. You have to fight for that. And that's something I do feel really strongly about is we're losing our ability to be free agents. And the only way we get that back is through letting the government know that we're not going to tolerate this. So for a very pro government book, I thought that stood out to me as like, this is the criticism of government. I guess he's not criticizing his own government, but just government as a structure itself. Yeah. So that's what I had for Starship Troopers. Do you guys have any closing thoughts? What are you gonna say, Rusty?
I was just going to say, interesting that you call out that quote, and it's the week of Memorial Day, which is exactly what we had on Monday, right? Is he recognized that freedom isn't free, there's a price paid, and that's exactly what that quote is.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point, Rusty. It is ironic that we just had Memorial Day and we're doing Starship Troopers.
Did you have this planned?
I did not. I did not have this planned.
It fit perfectly.
Yeah. I guess we'll wrap it up here, but not rushing anyone if anyone has any other closing remarks about it. No? Okay. We got some you Morbid Orchid has some shows coming up. You want to plug?
When do you
This is live.
Okay. Tomorrow, no, Friday, I'm playing at Underdog with Cass Patterson and Kendall Lagore. And by I mean my band Morbid Orchid. And then the day after, I'm playing Springwater with Johnny Mac and Photo Youth. And then, not too far off, I'm playing with these guys. Do you want to announce the show? I unfortunately don't have the date at top of mind.
Yeah, so we got two in June. Let me make sure I've got them correct. One is the 15th at the Underdog. That's Saturday. And then the one that we're playing with Morbid Orchid is on the 21st, which is the following Friday at Dark Matter with an out-of-town band called Lunar Moth.
Oh yeah.
Heck yeah.
Well, Alice, if you haven't already, check out Morbid Orchid, check out Cassette Stress, and check out Rusty Fowler's new single. Remind me again what your artist name is.
It's Telly Guy. The name of the song is Through the Shades. There's another song coming on June 5th called Pizak. There's another song coming on July 4th called The Innocent. There's another song coming on July 5th called Secondhand Smoke.
Nice.
Some of them are old that I just recorded them, but some of them are old. So lo-fi demo stuff.
Hell
Check
yeah.
it out.
Is that
It's
like
real.
a Telecaster or a television?
It could be what you want, but yeah, it's a telecast.
Awesome. That's what I want.
And
Next one.
next month, recommended by Taylor, we have Frankenstein.
One of my favorites.
Really?
Yeah,
I've never read it before.
I haven't read it for a long time, so I look forward to reading it again.
It's like 100 pages, I think. This copy's like 300 pages because it's so much like forward and afterward.
I didn't think you had. I thought it was going to be a different book because it looked so much thicker than what I'm.
Yeah.
It's a lot of add-on.
That's another. I'm excited to do it because that's another one of those, like, it became what everything else referenced. So.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
We were talking about that earlier too.
Yeah, I've never read Frankenstein, but I know some of the pop culture stuff, which I get the feeling is probably way off.
Yeah.
It's like you were telling me that Frankenstein's intelligent,
Yeah.
which I had no idea. I thought he was just like,
because it's funny. He's intelligent, but in his universe, they see him as a stupid monster. But then in popular media, they just showcase him as a stupid monster.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really ironic and poetic that it seems like media missed the point. But yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that. Join us next month, Alice. It's always the last Wednesday of the month. Yeah, so we'll see you next week.
Bye, y'all. Bye.
Nice to
Yeah.
meet you.